Hello and welcome to a special edition of Student Affairs Live, the weekly web show for student affairs professionals in higher education. We broadcast on the Higher Ed Live network every other Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. For those of you joining today's conversation, you can join the dialogue and tweet your comments and questions to Higher Ed Live and ACPA 15 hashtag. I'm your host, Tony Doody from Rutgers University.
And I'm Heather Shea from Michigan State University.
And we are broadcasting live from ACPA's National Convention in sunny, beautiful Tampa. We are fortunate to have with us today Robin Janice, also from Rutgers University, who will be monitoring the back channel. So thank you, Robin, for helping us out today. Before we get into the conversation about what just occurred here up on stage, the Ideas Generator program, we first need to take a moment to acknowledge and thank our sponsors. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on strategy, branding, web design, and more.
Student Affairs Live is also exclusively sponsored by ACPA, College Student Educators International. ACPA's strategic partnership with Higher Ed Live calls attention to the pairing of innovative professional development delivery with the strength of a renowned professional association. ACPA publishes the Journal of College Student Development and About Campus, and we are pushing the envelope for innovation and high-tech initiatives and engagement opportunities like the one that we featured here today.
So for those joining in just now, we just had a great opportunity to see a panel of really some pillars of the profession in both scholarship and practice. And we had in the former show, Patty Perillo, Joan Hurt, Vasti Torres, John Dugan, Bob Reason, Donna Lee, and Jill Carnegie. Today's conversation was focused on the topic of narrowing the gap from preparation to practice, from what we learn to what we do. And I'm pleased to have join me the distinguished panel who stayed around for the Higher Ed Live portion of the interview piece today. And perhaps we can start off by having each of you introduce yourself, your name, your institution, your role, and the one word that best describes how you felt. We can do a little res life exercise here. How you felt during the first ever Ideas Generator program. Dwayne, you're the mastermind behind that, and we'll get into that in a minute, but maybe we can start off with you.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Dwayne Todd, and I serve in my professional role as the Vice President for Student Affairs at Columbus College of Art and Design in Ohio. And my role at the convention is to be the program's co-chair for the convention educational components. And one of the individuals who helped sort of create the idea of this idea generator and figure out how it's going to work. So I guess my one word is relieved. I think it worked, so I feel relieved.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bob Reason. I'm a faculty member at Iowa State University, and my one word would be challenged.
Jill Carnegie, Assistant Vice President for Student Development at St. Louis University, and I would say provoked.
I'm Joan Hurt. I'm a professor in the higher education program at Virginia Tech, and I would say my one word would be stimulated.
Hello, John Dugan. I'm a faculty member at Loyola University Chicago in our higher ed program, and I would say terrified.
My name is Patty Perillo, and I'm the Vice President for Student Affairs at Virginia Tech. And I would say that my word is hopeful. The one thing I also want to add, if it's okay, is that John and I were talking about this and just wanted to name that we recognize that there aren't colleagues of color sitting on the stage. And so we tried to identify folks before they left, and we weren't able to do that, but we just wanted to name that in this space because we think it's really important.
Thank you, Patty. Dwayne, I want to start with you actually, since you talked a little bit at the beginning about where this idea, tell us more. Where did it come from? How did it start? Why did this program format come this year, in Tampa?
The genesis of this program started at the summer leadership meeting, which I think is now called the July leadership meeting, here in the Marriott Hotel in Tampa. We were trying to envision a program format that would deal with a very practical issue in the field from a different angle, not problematizing over and over and over again, but really working toward something that had relevancy to everyone in their work. It had relevancy to our faculty. It had sort of broad interest across the field. Something that seems to perplex us, and we seem to get hung up on and never really move forward on coming up with good ways of addressing it. And we wanted a format that was different, sort of engaging. We didn't want this to be just another panel, which certainly have value, but we wanted it to be something that was unusual and that was didactic and engaging. So we thought, when we do panels, we usually put up the type of people that you saw starting the conversation, but we thought, even from a power privilege standpoint, a lot of these same people always get asked to be on panels, right? So how many people out there would love to be up here and on the panel? And so we thought, well, we could do this. We could make this an opportunity to sort of flip it and open up the gates and let people come up and be on a distinguished panel.
I mean, one of the things I particularly love about ACPA is the fact that all voices matter, right? And this program format really demonstrated that anyone can be a part of it, share your knowledge and be part of the conversation. So thank you for offering that this year.
And I thought what was interesting, I was leery of who was going to come up. And then was it going to be a certain identity? And that really, to me, got blown out of the water from the diversity of everybody from gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, race, level, from graduate student to senior, from international. I mean, that's what was fascinating, particularly when it was a pilot.
So John, you were the first ever provocateur, excellent name. Wondering if you're going to be adding that to your business card.
It's already on there, actually. It's on the CV. I don't know that the academics will respond to it, but it's on there nonetheless.
So how did you feel? What were some of your challenges as you tried to corral this very outspoken, strong group of professionals?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this was a lot of fun. It was terrifying, though. So I would say a couple of things come to mind. The first is that in a situation like this, I think when we come to professional conferences, we spend so much time preparing to give that perfect speech, to have that perfect panel, to answer the questions perfectly. So this was a bit of an exercise in discomfort, I think, for everyone involved. We don't know what's going to come out in terms of our conversation. We didn't know what it's going to look like, who might come up and challenge our assumptions, not just in a room with people at ACPA, but also on Higher Ed Live, watching from all over. And so that was one of the things that was both interesting and scary for me about what this would look like.
Well, and let me echo that sentiment. First of all, let me start by saying that you did a fabulous job.
Thank you.
And I think you enabled the flow of the session because of the respect that you showed to the panelists, both those coming on and those departing. So I commend you for, I don't know that I could have handled it with any degree of grace, and you certainly did a wonderful job. But if you saw the email communications that went on before this, you saw people saying, who's going down with the ship? Those were phrases being used because we really didn't know what was going to transpire. And I agree with Jill. I think it was fascinating to see the people who were willing to take risks, and that at the end of the session, no one on the original panel was sitting up on the stage here. So from that perspective, I think it worked.
So before, Sydney Keene during the last show actually tweeted in from Bridgewater State University, and she simply wrote, can someone explain? I don't really understand the facilitation approach. So how would you describe that facilitation process?
Yeah. For me, part of what we talked about was what does it look like to have some type of balance between what would be considered an intergroup dialogue, absent maybe the process component, but then also improvisational technique where you were queuing up, pausing, redirecting, much more directive than I would typically be in an intergroup dialogue. And then what does that then stimulate? I think the hardest part for me was how do you then keep focused on the idea generation? And I think we saw that play out a little bit in the panel as well, that you put a bunch of academics together. And I'd argue everyone together feels so passionately about these issues that we problematize and we start to try and explain and dig into. But I think that was part of what the facilitation was supposed to look like. How do we keep people in and out of the panel? How do we add new voices and ideas? And as we saw, many of the directions that we had were a function of who came up and what was salient for them. In some cases, not even what we were talking about.
So I'm curious, I mean, it was an idea generator. You talked a little bit about how that was maybe met some of the goals, maybe not all, but of those of you who are on the original panel, what were the ideas that were generated, and then what do you think you'll go back on your campuses or encourage your colleagues to try as a result of this discussion?
Well, the word I said was provoked, of how I felt about it, and it was really provoked to think further about ways that we can create communities of learning. How do we break down some of the barriers? What are ways to provide people time to reflect? How do we really get people to think critically, and how is that a priority, and not necessarily solve the immediate problem, but look at the larger landscape? So I think I'll walk out of here thinking, okay, what are all the possibilities? What are some things that we may have started on our home campus, but that we could certainly do a better job of, a more thorough job of? What are some of the things that we could just get rid of that really have little relevance, or at least little impact on the student experience on our campus, but we hold tight because we've always done it?
So John had used the language of intergroup dialogues just a minute ago, and throughout this entire discussion earlier, that idea or those processes were in my head. They kept coming up, and part of it was, and this was the challenge for me, I hadn't thought as deeply about the multiple cultures involved in the discussions that we were identifying as missing, right? Whether it was a difference in culture, power in hierarchy, or whether it was new person to the organization versus established person in the organization, the institution, or whether it was faculty and student affairs professional, academic affairs, student affairs professional. And not meaning to co-opt the language of culture and the language of intergroup dialogue, but it struck me that the skills that are taught in those and are developed in those processes are exactly the skills we need to teach and develop with our young professionals in order to engage in the conversations we identified as missing. And so what I'm taking back the idea, maybe it's more or less a new idea, more just reinforcing the importance of finding intentional spaces in my curriculum for students to practice and develop those skills.
And what I would add to that is that I think that in order to practice those skills, you have to know that you have something to contribute. And I think that what we did today that was really important and really powerful is that we helped people understand that every voice mattered, every person had a perspective. It didn't matter in terms of identity or positional power, that every voice mattered. And so we really simulated this kind of co-creation, co-construction experience that doesn't often happen in our own divisions and on college campuses. And so one of the things that I'm reminded of is the power of this, and thinking about how it is that I continue to do this, or do this in a better way or a different way when I return to my home campus.
Well, I also think, as I was sitting on stage and sitting in the audience and listening, in my head, I was trying to translate what we were talking about into actions that I could take in my classroom or in working with graduate students. And John asked you went to the lightning round, and I'm not sure we gave you what you were hoping we would give you at that point. And I don't know whether it's because we couldn't think quickly enough to do that translation, or that we were so caught up in the insights we were gaining from the panelists that we wanted to take all of those in. So I can think of several things that I can actually go back to my campus and do. I can go back to my campus and I can incorporate into my classroom activities where students have to confront one another with things that they may not wish to talk about if they weren't forced to do so. I can go back to my campus and I can give students an assignment where they intentionally have to go out and participate in a budget design and review process. I can go back to my campus and I can work with my students in organizational theory to have them go out and observe meetings and other settings where a collective of people are talking and come back with an analysis of what the politics were that are going on. So there are things that I can now think of that I'm not sure I could think of when we were sitting on the panel.
There's not time for process and reflection, right? I mean, that's the kind of the demand. And the pace of higher ed is changing so quickly. So practicing those skills might be really valuable for students.
Well, and even how do we do it as an association? I mean, I went directly to my campus, but then what are the uniquenesses within ACPA and some of the structures that could?
It's really interesting because the thing that's stirring in me is that I recognize that I'm an invited panelist here and that this is, you and Tony are facilitating this. But there's also a part of me that wants to be responsive and to follow the guides, the prompts. But I was struck by one of the things that John said at the end is that it's not often that we use a moment and deconstruct it and talk about what just happened. And so part of me wants to spend some time talking about, so what just happened?
And this is the language that we get into with the Mid-Level Management Institute. For me, it was watching folks, and including you, demonstrating the connection of head and heart. There was a lot of head and heart connection in that conversation, which is where, for me, the learning occurs, right? And so the challenge, the risks that people took when they came up, to first get on stage in front of a pretty large audience, and then also online and streamed live, but also then to speak and to be vulnerable, to demonstrate the things that we all did. So, head and heart connection.
Other thoughts on that? I mean, I think this is a fabulous question to ask. I mean, I think about experiential learning and the ability to process and think through what happened. And, you know, again, with the quick pace of our work, not only are you coming up with ideas really quickly, but you also don't necessarily always have that built-in reflection time. So in addition to the ideas that you might take back, you know, what about the process, you know, worked for you, or that you would like to kind of discuss and talk about with each other?
Well, I think in some ways this provides a model of a style of program you could do, whether it's in an academic classroom or at home. My point of caution there is, I think, we sometimes create false dichotomies. And I heard this a little bit in our panel around, do I have power, do I not? We all sometimes have power, different types of power. We sometimes swing the pendulum on the responsibility of this person or that person versus its shared responsibility. And I think that one of the underlying themes was, I haven't learned that yet. And the process of engaging like this, if we wait until we're perfect and we've learned every skill, we will never get to.
You know, I was reminded of that during the panel. In the last couple of years, I was a student affairs administrator for 17 years before I became a faculty member. And I said to myself, I will never be an administrator again. And I wasn't for 19 or 20 years. And then in the last couple of years, I've taken on, begrudgingly, I will say, a couple of administrators.
But very well, I will say.
You know, thanks, your check's in the mail. Administrative role, so I was a director of the School of Education, and then I was an interim dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences. And what John just said came back to me today, and that is, I believe I came into those positions overtly behaving very confidently. Covertly, I was terrified. Because I didn't know whether I could do it or not. And the biggest thing that came out of both of those positions is how different your perspective is when you live in another role for a period of time. And how important it is to always attend to the perspective that the other is coming from. And I was reminded of that today again and again and again, in particular by the students who got up here and took a risk and said, here's what you're not giving me, and how do I learn that stuff?
As someone who was not on the panel but observing from the side over here, one of my keenest observations, I think, of what I saw happening was that assumptions are we know we all have assumptions. We admit that we come to any dialogue like this with assumptions, but we're also careful in a lot of our endeavors like this to be ready for those certain assumptions to be challenged, and it's that there's safety in this notion that, okay, they're probably going to ask me about this, and they're probably, so I can be sort of prepared to respond to that in a way that I sort of maintain some dignity about myself. But this was unanticipated, and so people came up. I didn't expect international colleagues to come up and really just challenge us in a number of ways about assumptions we make about how you even enter the field and what is required to just sit in the seat of a college administrator. And I thought that was interesting because in some ways it mirrors what our new professionals experience when they get into their new positions, because there are assumptions that people are okay with you challenging, and there are assumptions that are fearful for people. And when you challenge an assumption that they're not ready for, that is often where they get caught in a political issue, or they get caught in an area where they get a hand slap and they don't know why, because they pushed a button that someone wasn't ready for them to push.
I think something that was very different here, though, than on home campus was it was refreshing. I felt probably safer. There weren't the politics that I just had an argument with you about budget, or you cut mine, or that, excuse me, that John was an outside facilitator, that there weren't as many layers, and that I knew so many of you in collegial ways.
What was happening for me is the conversation went to power and privilege. That was really fascinating for me. And as I was sitting up here, I was thinking, okay, here's an opportunity for us to model. While I didn't name specific ideas, which was the idea generator, I was thinking about what is it that I need to do to model or live this conversation around power and privilege. And I started thinking about, okay, wait a minute, there's 3 SSAOs and 2 faculty members here. Okay, we need to get other voices up here. And then other voices started coming up, and then there were, Basti and I were still on the stage for a really long time. And John, one of the things I loved at the end is that you named that assumption, which I think was so important. But I went off to the side and I said to Dwayne, I just got off of that really good. We got to get Basti off, because it's a voice of power and privilege, and we need to figure out. So no one was coming up. So I actually went and started tapping. So I thought we need more of an international voice, and our international colleagues from UK were here. Dwayne and I met with them yesterday, and I said, I think your voice is really important, and I would encourage you to come up. And I saw Melissa, African-American woman who's in a mid-level management position. I said, you know what, we need more African-American colleagues and a voice like yours up on that stage. I would encourage you to come up. So while I didn't name it, one of the ways that we affect power and privilege is to very intentionally invite people into the conversation. And that was all happening in the background for me while this was going live, which is really powerful.
And I wouldn't even expand on that. So one of the things that was interesting for me is, Joan, you shared a little bit about what happens when we're put in these novel situations where we have a role that has some type of script for us, and we think there's an expectation to live a certain script. And so we are human beings. Like, you don't become, Superman or Wonder Woman or Batman when you take on these roles. And so what's happening internally for us? So to expand on it, for me, what is happening is it's an efficacy concern, right? So I'm nervous, so what do I default to? I default to, I know Patty. Patty will keep the conversation going. And I knew Basti was a faculty rep, and I felt there has to be a faculty person up here at all times. Now, did there? Absolutely not. But that's what came up as in an unexplored. And to take one step further from that, I needed you to come up and tap me on the side to say, John, time to get Basti off. And if that hadn't happened, I might not have done it. And so I think, what does it mean for us to be both open to that feedback to now, but also to be critically self-reflective of what was going on there, and how does that show up on my home campus? How does that show up in my classroom, in my roles?
It was interesting to me because Patty and I were both here from Virginia Tech. And I will tell you that, with all due respect, I didn't think about you as the vice president at all during this session. And we have, our program and your division work quite closely together. And I think in a very symbiotic kind of way. But I just didn't have that feeling about you during this session at all. I did worry that there was too much of a Virginia Tech presence out of 6 on the panel. But I think it speaks to the tone of the session, which was to try and level the playing field to the degree that is possible, and that you were intentional about getting different voices up here who weren't afraid, in many cases, to speak to power.
Well, and I was obviously oblivious that you were doing that, but so how do we do that on our campus to quietly invite the unheard voices to come to the table and not make a big deal out of it?
And avoid essentializing at the same time, right? So it's a both and. How do we motivate but not tokenize? create space.
And particularly, how do you do that outside of the space of the position power that you have, for example? When Patty Perillo says something, it's hard to not assume that that's coming from your position as vice president, but it's coming from your position as a person from your personal values.
But can Patty do that outside of Patty's position? I think that was one of the questions that was raised in the discussion was we bring with us the engagement. So when Patty Perillo taps you on the shoulder, you do it because she's Patty Perillo.
But two people said no. And I only did it because I said if you're ready and if you're comfortable, and I only did it with people that I had relationships with. So I didn't want to have the essentialism, the tokenism. I was concerned about that. I was able to say Melissa because we have a deep connected relationship. And that mattered. So go ahead, Bob, I'm sorry.
No, what I wanted to kind of take a step back and for the folks who are watching on the internet now, who hopefully watch the discussion, and the people who watch the discussion will come back and watch this now because you all are modeling exactly what we talked about needing to happen, the openness, John, to somebody, you were in a position of power. You were the powerful person on the stage. You told us when to shut up and when to talk.
I mean, it wasn't a tour, right? I mean, that title alone comes with the script.
But you chose what was provocative too, right? And to continue that dialogue.
And so, letting us know that Patty was doing this, that you were open to feedback, that we are now reflecting on and processing who we are on this stage at this time in this conversation is exactly what we were saying was missing from our organizations on campus that allowed our students to stay, the gap, that allowed the gap to occur. That maybe was the gap.
And I know that Tony wants to move on, but I want to put a point on this. In order for this to work, it took two things. It took people stepping up, but it also took you all stepping down.
Yeah.
And that's the other side that I don't want to lose either, because we could just keep adding people to the stage, and then it becomes a cacophony of voices where it's just chaos at some point. And what needed to happen, and it did, because you were primed ahead of time to say, when you get tapped, it's time to step down. And so there wasn't any of this sort of wrangling of, well, wait, I'm not done, I have something else to say. It was, okay, this is what the expectation is. So I come down, someone steps in, very smoothly, right? But that was all set up ahead of time.
Very minimally.
Well, yeah,
I mean,
it works
that
incredibly
was
hard. So there's an inverse relationship here, right? So even if it's, it needs to be set up and it needs to be framed like that. But at the same time, I had like a Survivor television moment where I was like, oh boy, who am I going to tap out first? And please give me some grace because this is not about what you've contributed or how you've contributed and can I get someone back in that? And that happens in our daily lives, right? Where you were either asked to take a step back because whether it's from a place of privilege or institutional role, our voices carry more, or you have to ask others to do the same. And this was a simulation of that for me.
But it was interesting, when I was sitting in the audience, there were several times where I would have liked to have responded to some of the, what people were saying, and I thought, no, it's time for someone else to have an opportunity to do that. It was a very conscious decision, because you had said to us, if you want to come back up on the stage, please do that. And I, while I would have felt free to do it, was very conscious of choosing not to do it.
That's to Dwayne's point. In order for this to work, people had to step down, right?
So there is an incredibly lively conversation happening in the virtual world. And it actually, 15 minutes ago, paralleled or foreshadowed the conversation that you just had. Mel Rocco says the event was great, but the love stayed on. How do we have these hard conversations with those who don't have the luxury to watch every word? And then there was a follow-up. It says, who realistically has the power and privilege to continue to challenge ideas in a public film session? Thoughts about that?
I'll start. I would say the first thing that comes to my mind is developmental readiness, right? So we have to start learning these things and explicitly teaching it. And we can't expect that every moment is going to be an aha, radical change moment. But it's the process of what goes on that compounds over time and collectively gives us the skills that when opportunities arise that we construct, that you can then lean into that. So when I think of that from a teaching standpoint, on day one, we may all want to have these radical conversations, but we're all at different places of entering that, whether it's around our own social identities, places of where I'm comfortable or not. And so we have to let them roll and flow and keep challenging to push, and not, it's a little bit about how do we have short-term incremental gains, but keep that eye on the long game.
Tony, read that question again if you don't mind.
Okay, making me take it back. All right, here we go. How do we have these hard conversations with those who don't have the luxury to watch every word and who realistically has the power or privilege to contribute challenging ideas in a public film session?
So it's interesting that, and I may not be hearing it the way the person intended, but even a framing of who really does have the power and privilege question goes back to a comment that I made earlier about it is about me and it is about you. And I think often in these conversations about privilege and power, we want to point fingers at those in power and not recognize the work that we need to do to learn how to speak our truth. How to develop the skills. So part of it's about in my positions of power, and I'm not always in those positions, but when I am in positions of power, what am I doing to create this space? It's also when I'm in positions where I'm not in power, what am I doing to push forward? And we don't always look at it from both sides.
Patty and I had an off-stage conversation that mirrored the question, because I made the comment that we had 3 of the best senior student affairs officers I've ever met on the stage, Patty, Donna, and Jill, all of whom are open to the kind of feedback and reflection that so they model what we were talking about. And then I thought, but you were 3 of the best. So how do we engage those folks who need to do the work that we're talking about that Patty, Jill, and Donna have already done, and then show them how to do it and help them do it so that it is a safe place to engage in the kind of feedback that we encourage the non-necessary to do.
Well, and I think the questioner said, how do I do this when I can't afford to think about every word? And my response to that would be, you have to practice doing this often enough that it is, you internalize how to do it without, so it is going to take more time. It's like any skill you want to learn. It will take more time to do this the first few times. But the more you practice it, the more readily it should come to you. And this gets back to my initial point about delayed gratification. You'll be a better professional having developed that skill.
And a better human, right? And a better parent or sister or partner, or right? It goes into that part of our lives as well. I agree with you, Jim.
I think this is a social identity place. So one of the things that I'm wondering about is if some of that's embedded in the question. So if I'm operating in an environment, which and this is going to be a moment of vulnerability. I work in a religious institution. It's a Catholic institution, so there are certain standards. Now, I happen to be very lucky about that particular institution I work in, but I have to enter many conversations, not all, but many, in some ways, not moderating, but being hyper conscious of my sexual identity as a gay man. And so what went through my mind was, I mean, even sharing that now feels vulnerable because this is straight line, right? But there are lots of folks who are in contexts where they're constantly moderating, not by choice, but by social structure, their identity. And so what does that mean? And my answer that I've come to is, how from an ally standpoint do I leverage my social capital to take more risks in environments where it's less risky because of other reasons, so I have time, I can play a little more, I can be a little bit more directive. And then how do I cultivate the relationships to know that it's not just me having to have that conversation in other environments where I may have to be strategic in how I disclose. And one of the ways I think that plays out in the classroom is our conversations around code switching. And is code switching assimilation, or is code switching one of the deepest levels of authenticity? Because you're saying, this is my identity, and I change when to disclose, how to disclose, to navigate these structures.
Can you step back and define code switching for us?
Sure. So for me, code switching is knowing your social role and having a dual consciousness of there is a script about how I should show up, how I should engage, what my engagement relationship should look like within the structure. But I'm going to either play that role or not for my own navigational purposes.
It's funny, we had a conversation with Ken Elmore from Boston, and he talks about this concept of genuine versus authentic being realized. And if I were truly real, I would probably, and genuine, I'd probably get fired, right? So he talks about having these filters and playing a role in his position. Just as he told, he's switching back and forth. He's not the person who he is at home, behind closed doors, as opposed to a public figure.
For the audience, if you're interested in reading more about this is like the nerd side of me, right? So Susan Jones, Kristen Smete-Skendel, who is our conference chair here at ACPA this year, and Julie Chokin wrote a beautiful article around troubling authenticity. And what does that mean? It explores this, I think, in really powerful ways.
The questions are flying, so she's moderating the questions over here. So something, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that Basti suggested as a fairly provocative idea was that you only need a bachelor's to be a resident hall director, and that you need some mid-level experience before you go on to get a master's. And then you should really be senior before you go on. And I guess Patrick Love, wherever he is, was watching and tweeted, if entry-level pros don't need a master's degree, how will they learn about how to best develop students?
Yeah, and I think that pairs actually really well, so let's definitely talk about that. But somebody else asked the question, is the work of new SA pros intellectually stimulating enough to keep them in the field? So they will just experience this master's, professional preparation experience where they're in classes, you all who are faculty, asked to really think about and delve into this, and then they go back as an entry-level hall director and perhaps don't have the agency or maybe even the intellectual stimulation in their job every day. So I think there's parallel pieces to these two thoughts.
Well, there's also a social replication going on here, because if we have a generation of supervisors of these new professionals who aren't of the ilk where they will stimulate their employees, they will encourage them to engage in professional development kind of activities, then whatever aspirations those new professionals have are very quickly diminished and diluted. And that coupled with a pretty flat organizational structure, I mean, there are so many hall director jobs and so few other kinds of entry points into the profession, that I think we need to seriously think about what is the level of training that's necessary in order for the person to make an informed decision about whether this is the profession they do want to go to. Because it is a long haul to get to a more senior level position. You can't expect this within the first 3 to 5 years. And again, I go back to this notion of delayed gratification. You have to make an intentional decision that this is the profession you want to pursue in order to have the fortitude that you need to gain the professional experiences that you have to achieve those kinds of positions.
I would say I'm with Patrick Love on this. I mean, just because you can have a bachelor's degree and perhaps lead well as a hall director doesn't mean it's the best paradigm or framework or learning opportunity. I think that the work around having folks get a master's degree and learning this means that it's constantly inhabiting the theory and practice, and that is the way that we learn this.
So I don't disagree with any of these ideas that the master's 2-year past college degree makes you better at the opportunity to be a hall director. It's the content that is important. And it makes me question, why don't we have bachelor's degrees in higher education?
And that conversation has started among folks. So this was when I was off stage when Basti said that, and Joan, this was the point.
You're never off stage.
I stood up and then I sat back down because it challenged me, and I needed to hear what she had to say, think about it, because my initial visceral reaction was absolutely not. The difference between somebody who does the work and a professional person is what should occur during those 2 years. And it was really interesting to me, and I wish Basti was here to have this conversation, because she started the discussion at the beginning of the panel with the importance of critical thinking and the importance of self-reflection in critical thinking, which I think is what we ought to be teaching as part of the 2-year master's program. So the difference between being a green dean and a bachelor's trained hall director, right out of undergraduate, and then having 2 years of part-time work with intentional learning, reading, and reflection, and opportunity to fail and reflect, might be the difference between being an okay hall director or functional hall director and a very good, solid, professional, reflective, critical thinking professional.
I had such a reaction as well. I didn't know if my provocateur jaw dropped, and that might have been the moment I completely fell. Right? I think that might have been when that happened. And here's what I love though. If we don't engage with those questions, how do we know how to respond or what we actually believe? So maybe the idea generator causes us to actually have to rationalize and think through what we actually think. And you know, for me, I'm right there with, on one hand, I see absolutely my counseling degree is what allows me to function in my job. Those fundamental school skills around what I learned in counseling have, throughout my career, provided the bedrock for how I engage with people. But at the same time, when we're at institutions where there's not as many assistantships, where there's not as many opportunities for students, if the internship or the graduate assistantship is the only vehicle for professional practice, what are we privileging in terms of who then can come in the field?
Yeah.
Well, and I also think that there's another angle to this, and that is the degree to which we vocationalize higher education. Because the students aren't coming to us with an expectation of developing critical thinking and intellectual skills that will serve them in the long run. They come to us because they think it will prepare them for a job. And I constantly say to them, we're not preparing you for a job, we're trying to prepare you for a career. And I can give you all the information I have available to me, but unless you are processing that information with a mindset that goes beyond a vocation, I may not have the impact that I would like to have on the students. And I think that's on us. I think we have commodified higher education to such an extent that this isn't, for many entering master's students, particularly out of their bachelor's programs, this is a vocational track. This is not a professional track.
My thoughts right now are like projectile vomit. I mean, there's so many different pieces. But I mean, there's so many different pieces going on in my head about this, and part of it goes back to lifelong learning. And for the first position, other duties as assigned is a critical piece, and it may not be as intellectually challenging as the master's program that I was just in, but how do I apply those pieces of knowledge? But then how do I figure out who I am as a professional? How do I figure out the landscape where I've got agency or ability to make an impact? And it's just not moving papers on a desk, but where can I have an impact on the student learning experience? But how am I learning my role, and how do I continue to move it forward? And when Basti first said it, I was like, she's a D. And then I gave it some more thought. I mean, because you can get it, then I'm listening to John and it's like, I want to take your class. But I mean, it's the whole lifelong learning, and things happen to you along the way. So I would challenge anybody that it's ever a straight path for what I believed, a year ago, I still believe today, or how do I continue to change my lenses and complicate myself more and make it more, I think sometimes I make it too difficult for myself, but how do I keep adding layers of interest about what are all the possibilities?
It's really interesting. I mean, I think the other piece here is that many of us come from pretty traditional master's prep programs. So what about those who don't, or gain experience, or return back after time spent in the job, or come from a different type of preparation program, an MBA, for example? And how do we, maybe this is the role of ACPA or professional association connections to foster learning and development at other levels. Does it have to be in the classroom?
Well, and I was at a place where the master's degree in student affairs or higher ed wasn't an automatic. And really, with diverse backgrounds of education, as well as diverse identities, really made for a richer and with the ability to serve more students. But then what's the overarching piece that professional associations, that those in leadership positions can frame all these different, whether you've got a master's in physics or student affairs, but what's the underlying reason for why we do what we do? How does the leader, and that may be informal leaders as well as the senior student affairs officer, the director of residential life, but what's the reason? What's the compelling that you're really going to go in there and you're almost going to die for it because you want the students to have that kind of experience or that kind of learning?
Well, if we can't answer that question and this question, then we have to seriously say, who are we? We've been talking about this for as long as the profession exists. Who are we as a profession? If it is easy for an MBA or a PhD in pharmacy to step into a senior leadership position, which we are increasingly seeing across campuses, what kind of professional reputation do we have and what kind of credibility have we established as a profession to warrant the respect that we expect to get in terms of when there is an opening, we want someone who has the
Jen, it's
preparation.
interesting because I actually get more concerned when we have SSAOs who have a graduate degree from a higher ed student affairs program, but they are not leading in the context of our scholarship. And I think that's where we lose credibility. Because then we have graduate students coming out of these programs expecting that the profession is going to be a certain way, and it creates, dissonance is fine, it's not about dissonance, it's about, so really who are we, what are we about? If we say that's what we're about, but I'm working and this is not what it's about, so actually, maybe it's equal concern, it's not either or, it's a both and, right? So my continued concern, and it's part of the work that I'm thinking about, how is it that I continue to lead the way? I remember when I was ACPA president, and I asked Liz Witt and Terry Piper if they would do a primer for student learning for SSAOs. And they both said, before we just engage the primer, let's talk to some of our SSAO colleagues. And they did. And they said, we're not going to do the primer. And I said, why? And they said, because SSAOs do, they're like, don't tell us about learning, but tell us about development, tell us about budgets and Title IX responses. And so if we have that many SSAOs who are thinking about the scholarship of our profession, then I think that we're doing a disservice to our profession.
We're leading only looking up, right? And not thinking about the division that they're leading and the folks who work with them, for them. So I think that's another challenge.
I wonder to what degree is that about mindset? So are we creating programs where individuals come out knowing that they are going to have to constantly continue learning both functional and specific domains like Title IX, like budget, but also in terms of personal and human development? And if you go through a program that's a credential and nothing more, then I wonder, is that what the difference is mindset? And it could be a higher ed program or it could be a program.
Well, I also don't wonder if it's a difference between the student affairs and a higher ed program. And the very different theoretical fund. Student affairs is based on developmental psychology and other forms of human development. And higher ed programs are based on management, organizational theory. On many campuses, they are two separate programs, and sometimes they don't communicate with one another.
But you could be the higher ed piece, I get it's about management, organizational theory, and leadership development, but often, or sometimes, folks forget what our industry is. It's about education and human development and learning. So they could be good leaders and CEOs in other companies, but if you're going to be an SSAO in higher education, then it's got to be in the context of our work, which is education.
I would argue that if you come out of a student affairs program, you have to recognize these other kinds of organizational issues. If you come out of a higher education program, you have to recognize the educational component that you may or may not have received.
And I wonder how much of it is responding to the realities of the SSAO job, particularly at large universities now. I mean, it's such universities become such complex organizations that the two of my favorite vice presidents who are on the stage currently are lawyers. Don't have PhDs in higher ed, but have law degrees, and they do some of the best work. The one in particular at Penn State, who I got the opportunity to work with, was one of the most curious individuals I've ever met. And he wouldn't walk into his desk, into his office without a set of higher ed related books on his table. So I'm going back to making the connection to the lifelong learning. So whether you come from a higher ed program and you you've got the cognitive psych and the developmental psych background, and you need to focus instead your lifelong learning on budgets and legal issues and policy and formation, or if you're coming from the legal arena or in the other arena, and you need to focus your lifelong learning, your continued education more in the development and student learning area, I think it's the curiosity and the learning that tells you how, regardless of how you enter, that tells you how you're going to be. And it's that lifelong learning that's important. It's like I'm co-signing what John said.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to have lunch with my former vice president, Dr. Greg Lemling last week, and I told him he was going to be on the show. In trouble. So he is always helpful, and he prepared a list of issues that he thought students should be prepared for in this current day and age. And it was a 2-page list, and it was quite frankly daunting. And I said, there's no way that you can prepare anyone in a 2-year period. So it goes back to this concept of curiosity and lifelong learning and creating a path for a professional development plan, which is a continuum, right? So maybe it's looking at it more than just this 2-year block of time.
Well, if you don't, you're dead in the water. I mean, if I would have stayed with Chickering and Perry, and Keegan and some of those, I mean, where would I be with, I mean, just the whole litany of theorists and all that Susan's doing and intersection. I mean, there's just so many more pieces.
Well, that's one of the most transformative things about doing a PhD is that at the end of the process, what you really realize is how little you know. And it prepares you to try and to be that lifelong learner. I think at the end of a master's program, sometimes I think students feel they should be, I feel like they should say to me, you complete me. That they should be fully prepared. And what I want to say to them is, no, what you should have is some fundamental skills that will teach you how to be a learner in your professional career.
So how do we teach curiosity? I think I asked earlier, how do we teach the intergroup dialogue skills?
You come to my Pachaka Cha tomorrow night at 6:39 to hear the curiosity and the kidney cancer.
We have 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I think this also goes back to a previous show that you hosted, Tony, where you're talking about rookie smarts. I mean, and what does it mean to be to be doing something for the first time? And are we teaching that skill set? And it's about learning and development, but it's also about, the fixed mindset versus growth mindset. You can approach the work from this place of growth, and I don't have to have all the answers. I'm not going to graduate from a master's program, even though I read 100 case studies where I was the VP of whatever institution. That's not necessarily where you're going to start. So how do you keep that process moving along?
I'm so glad you said that. I think one of the things that triggers for me is how in our programs do we do the opposite of that? So the way we structure our curriculum is you need to learn 10 tons of theories at each stage. And then if that connects, I think, to what you were saying earlier about the vocationalization of higher ed. So if students are fearful that they're going to go on a market coming out of a master's program where they have to regurgitate Chickering and they have to know stage 1, 2, A, B, C, D, versus be critical consumers of knowledge, it's dually reinforcing. It's almost as if we have to disrupt something about ego around being comfortable with, I don't need you to know these theories. I need you to get under the hood of what's going on with you as you react to them, as well as the general process of learning. The content is just a vehicle to learning how to learn that can then be replicated with any content body anywhere, hopefully.
So I had this, I was going to try to be funny, but I can't. I had this really, couple of times say, man, I hope Art's not watching this. He has become, Art Chickering has become the epitome of something that isn't good.
Student affairs.
Right. Or maybe it's the epitome of not enough. I don't know, but and maybe I'm trying to problematize in a way I'm not supposed to be. And perhaps talking out both sides of my mouth right now. Because unless we are a profession, well, we can't be a profession if we don't agree upon, or at least some shared sense of foundational knowledge. Whether it's Art Chickering or Robert Keegan or Marcia Back-Pagola, we can agree, disagree, and have a conversation. But we need to identify a foundation upon which the lifelong learning builds. And so maybe I'm not talking about both sides. Maybe it's an and also rather than either or.
Well, and they also need to work to recognize that there are professionals who use theory all the time, but they don't articulate it as such. It's so internalized that they're just doing it. And so I may not say, oh, here I'm working on self-confidence, but I'm doing stuff to
See,
intentionally.
so here's my shameless plug, because I know somebody who's writing a book. It should be out hopefully in about a year. We all should buy. No, so for me, when I hear that we know theories and we use them, we aren't thinking about them, I draw maybe a nuanced or a distinction without a difference between an implicit versus an informal theory. So implicit is, another word for implicit theory is bias, right? So I'm acting upon an unacknowledged belief about the way you should behave when I do this to you or for you. That's an implicit theory, and that's a bias. What I would love for us to do is to move those folks who are behaving implicitly to an informal. And here's where it gets kind of fun to write. An informal theory that's informed by a formal theory. So we don't have to say Art Chickering tells me to do this. Sorry, Art. At this point in the student's career, but I know from previous experience that I've reflected upon that is informed by Art Chickering and other researchers, that if I do this, it's likely that the student will grow in this way. And that's, for me, the distinction between implicit and informal. And then let's reflect on it and start building in that feedback loop so that our informal theories actually change when I believe is supposed to happen doesn't happen. I need to acknowledge that and then readdress my informal theory. And hopefully then eventually some of us can readdress formal theories as well.
So we are reaching our final minute. So I'm going to try and enact the speed round. One thing in 30 seconds or less each of you would change about the format. Yeah, ideas generator session. As we move forward into Montreal, what would you change? One thing.
I would continue to push us towards solutions and not theorizing.
That is fair. A little bit longer would have been good.
Yeah, well, it's an hour and a half almost. All right, we'll have a whole afternoon.
Possibly explicit ground rules up on a screen so those in the audience had more planning or they could go.
Yeah, I think I would go back, I would make things, I would require every panelist to offer one concrete solution to an issue. What are you going to do when you go back to your meetings? What are you going to do next week?
Ask Boston to leave earlier. Even if you're scared.
I appreciate the comments about idea generator and back on the solutions, but I think that the reflection and the unpacking and deconstructing is so important. And so I don't want to continue to facilitate processes that just let ideas generate without contextualizing them and having deeper, more reflective. So I don't know if I would change much.
I'll add my thoughts. I think that this conversation should be part of the broader program, right? So instead of having it be this two-part thing, I think that would be really useful. Maybe we would get at some of those reflective pieces that you were looking for.
Well, it's kind of like Sex in a Box, where you have to do the thing and then come out and talk. Have you heard about it? And then talk about the experience. Okay, now I'm terrified.
I think we just violated some FCC laws right there.
Beautiful moment. So thank you to all of our guests. This was a wonderful conversation. We have another show, one more show tomorrow. Heather, you want to talk about
I'm
it?
thrilled, actually. I can't believe this, for those of you who put this program together, tomorrow from 5 to 6 p.m. back here in this room, I'm going to be interviewing two powerhouses of student engagement and assessment, George Koo and Jillian Kinsey from the stage. So they will have just given their head talks, I think talking broadly about the DQP and other initiatives, and Nessie, I have no doubt will come up, but we'll be talking broadly about student engagement, and I'm excited about that. So please join.
So you can receive email reminders about Higher Ed Live by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter, or browse the archives and share today's show. I hope people will share this show widely. I mean, some unbelievable education and learning. for those who are here and back home. My name is Tony Doody.
And I'm Heather Shea.
And we look forward to seeing you again at Higher Ed Live tomorrow night and through the back channel this weekend at ACPA. Make it a great week.